So I think that this story here applies to you and to me. We're nobodies in the big scheme of the world, and that's okay. So the follow-up question I want to ask is this. Do you think of your spiritual life, particularly your prayer life, do you think of that as a nobody, that it can accomplish great things for God? How do you look at your prayer life? How do you look at your relationship with God? Maybe if you were to rate do some personal introspection here. If you were to rate your spiritual life with God, would you give yourself a 3, a 4, a 5? Probably not go as high as a 7, I don't know. Where are you at in terms of that relationship that you have with God that is so dynamic that it influences things for God? That's kind of the nature of this story. So with that as the backdrop, as the introduction here, I want us to highlight here the fact that in the heart of this story, we're going to look at a nameless servant who steps out in faith, following the will of God, and prays, and his prayers are answered. Very specific prayers are answered. As I already noted, this is the longest story, so Moses takes quite a delight, I think, and obviously inspired of God, but he takes a long time to show the qualities of this story so that we can take it to heart and be changed by it. The key word that I want us to understand today is asking the question, what are the qualities of a dynamic spiritual prayer life? And all those words kind of work together. What are the qualities of a dynamic spiritual prayer life? And do you have these qualities in your life? The first dynamic spiritual quality of a dynamic life that's fervent in prayer for God is this: commitment. If you're going to have your prayers answered by God, if you're going to be in a relationship with God, you have to have commitment to God. You have to. It's essential. We see this in the opening verses of chapter 24. Let's read verses 1 through 9 here. It says, "Now Abraham was old, advanced in age, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in every way. Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who had charge of all that he owns, 'Please place your hand under my thigh, and I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I live, but you shall go to my country and to my relatives and take a wife for my son Isaac.' The servant said to him, 'Suppose the woman is not willing to follow me to this land. Should I take your son back to the land from where you come?' Then Abraham said to him, 'Beware that you do not take my son back there. The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my birth, and who spoke to me, and who swore to me, saying, to your descendants I will give this land, he will send his angel before you, and you will take a wife for my son from there. But if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be free from this my oath, only do not take my son back there.' So the servant placed his hand under the thigh of Abraham his master and swore to him concerning this matter." Now, there are some things going on here right out of the gate that are a little bit odd, so I'm going to try and address those as discreetly as I can, but you can kind of read between the lines or read the story here, and it's a little bit strange what's going on here. But to back up just slightly here, I want to highlight the fact that in this story here, the servant is not named. Now, there is conjecture that it's possibly Eliezer, which was the rightful heir of Abraham's estate before he had a son, and it's quite possible that that is the case. However, Moses doesn't highlight that here. He doesn't ever name this person, and so again, I want to remind us here that if you may think of yourself as a nobody in terms of the world again, but in terms of who God is, you are integral and important to the mission of God. This person is nameless, and yet he is tasked by Abraham to accomplish a mission that is quite hard to do. Go to a land that's far away from here and get a wife for my son. And God's in this, but you need to do this. You need to utter this strange oath, which we'll talk about briefly. And the servant has some right questions. He says, well, what if she doesn't follow? Then what should I do? Am I going to take Isaac back to the land and have him find somebody else? And Abraham is like, no, I need to stay in the land. My son Isaac needs to stay in the land. You are the only person that can accomplish what needs to be done. Again, that's huge application for us. Do you realize that in terms of your relationship with God, there are certain things in your life, the way God's created you, designed you, and has placed you on this earth right now, that only you can do? You're it. He created you with a purpose in mind, and it's your mission to figure out what that is and to do that. The servant understands his role. It's unique. You have a relationship with God. You have access to God individually that nobody else has. And so we see here, but then as we get more into the story here, there's Moses or Abraham tasked the servant by saying, I need you to take this oath. I need you to take this very, very seriously here. And so we see a tremendous commitment here. You need to do this. In fact, you're uttering something that is an oath. So put your hand in my thigh and utter this oath and invoke the name of the Lord. What is the kind of strange thing that happens here? So, according to Gordon Wenham, I think he offers some good insight into this here regarding the putting the hand in the thigh and uttering this oath. He says, the sacredness of this duty is underlined by the oath he is invited to swear. It is no ordinary request that Abraham is making, so he couches it with some delicacy when he says, please place your hand, please. So even what Abraham is asking the servant to do is a little bit strange. It wasn't like they did this all the time. So by putting his hand under Abraham's thigh, the servant was touching the membrum and thus giving the oath a special solemnity. In the ancient world, just like today where you might take an oath on a Bible, there was a symbol that was used to create the gravity of the situation. In other words, what Abraham is trying to get the servant to understand is he's trying to tie the physical symbol with the need for posterity and descendants. If this doesn't happen, my servant, then God's will doesn't move forward. So you need to understand the seriousness of this, and I'm going to help you not forget. Is kind of the gist of what Abraham is getting at. But even more importantly than the symbol is he asks the servant to invoke the name of Yahweh Elohim. We see that there. Verse number 7, the Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my birth. And he goes 4 or 5 times here in a short passage of Scripture. He invokes the name of the Lord, and then in verse number 9, he has the servant swear to Abraham using the name of God. It's implicit in the text there, but this is a very serious thing that Abraham is asking the servant to do. Be serious about this. So when we think about the commitment that's required, if you're going to live a life that is dynamic and spiritual according to what God expects of you, you have to take it very seriously. God expects it. Even in the New Testament, we see that and elsewhere in the Old Testament, when you vow vows to God, you shouldn't be frivolous about that. Matter of fact, Jesus comes along and he says, just let your yes be yes and your no be no. Don't get into the games of making deals with God. But here there was a very special, important thing that Abraham was getting at. Take it seriously. And the application for us then is if we're going to have the qualities in our life that are dynamic and spiritual and prayerful, then take it seriously. If God is going to move his sovereign plans forward through you, you can't be frivolous about God. You can't be. So this was a very important task that was being undertaken here. The servant understands the gravity of it. That's why he asked the question, well, what if she doesn't follow? And Abraham wisely says, look, if she doesn't follow, you're off the hook. But he also reminds the servant, my God will send his angel before you to get this task done. I really believe that is the pre-incarnate Jesus Christ, and I've talked about that before. I think that's who Abraham is referring to. I think he's referring to the person that he met with and spoke with at different times. He knows that he understands God's mission and God's will, and so he understands what he is asking the servant to do and taking this on. God's will will be done. But you need to understand, my servant, that this is serious, and so please take this vow. And so the servant does this. So our first point of application is, I don't think that clock is right. That clock is not right, and it's stuck, so I can be here forever because we're locked in time. All right, well, probably needs a battery. So, all right, hang with me here. First dynamic, the first quality that we see from the servant is his commitment. If you're going to be used of God, if you're going to have a spiritual, dynamic life with God, be committed. The second quality that we see from this is, second spiritual dynamic or quality that we see from the servant is he is obedient. He is immediately obedient. If you go to verse number 10 in this story, it says, we don't see a lot of delay at all. Then the servant took 10 camels from the camels of his master and set out with a variety of good things of his master in his hand, and he arose and went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor. If you're going to be in a relationship with God that is dynamic, where you're in God's will and your prayers are being answered, it doesn't begin with prayer. It begins with obedience. It begins with commitment. And we see here this servant immediately get up and go. He carries all kinds of goods with him. Later on in the story, we see that there are men with him. This was an entourage that went through the semi-arid terrain for hundreds of miles to find a wife where Abraham's native country is in Ur of the Chaldees. But the simple quality is this, again, this is a self-explanatory story almost. There was immediate obedience. Obedience is something that I think of often, and you should as well. Do you evaluate your life in light of God's word? Do you take the time to take stock of your life? If you were to dare to pray to the Lord, search me, O God, and see if there's any harmless way in me and lead me in the way everlasting, would you dare to open up your heart to God and let him start pointing out some things? Or not? This servant did not delay in what he knew was God's will for him, and he set out immediately on a rather arduous journey. But he does it. He does it immediately. There is no delay. There is no making excuses anymore. Once he understands the mission, once he has uttered his vow to God, he engages the process. We have to be obedient. If you're going to have a dynamic spiritual prayer life, you have to be obedient. It can't come along and say, oh no, I'm not going to do that, but I'll do this. It doesn't work like that. This nameless servant, this nobody, engages the process and immediately shows his obedience. But then we get to the heart of the story in the passage that we just read here. So he has commitment, he has obedience, but our third quality of dynamic spiritual prayer life is that he prays a very specific prayer. And it's highlighted. He repeats the prayer in giving testimony to God later from verses 42 through 46. He engages in this very specific prayer request. You can't go through life with just general sentimental prayers. It doesn't work like that. You can't just say, I'll bless all the missionaries and then God will take care of the missionaries, and bless my family and God will bless my family, and bless my job and God will bless your job and your life. You have to be willing to engage in very specific prayer requests with God. Notice this prayer again here. I challenge you to study this and meditate on this and pore over this. Notice the prayer, O Lord, the God of my master Abraham. So he's praying to the living God, the true God, the God that he has uttered an oath to, his master's God. That's the true God. It's the God of the Bible, as it were. Please grant me success today and show loving kindness to my master Abraham. Behold, I am standing by the spring, very specific request, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. I love transparent prayers when people just pray and they're just kind of almost in conversation. He's like, so God, the ladies are coming, just so you know that. Of course God knows the ladies are coming, but he's willing to just transparently and simply lay out his request to the Lord. Now, may it be that the girl to whom I say, please let down your jar so that I may drink, and whose answers, drink and I will water your camels also, may she be the one. Okay, it's not a general prayer. Okay, many girls are going to come and draw water, but the girl that says, oh, I'm going to feed your 10 camels as well, that's a significant woman. That's a lot of work being done there. Gallons of water. Camels drink a lot of water. So he has a very specific request, process of elimination. Lord, I need you to work in such a way that I know your specific will is being done. Very fervent prayer here. You have appointed, drink, verse 14, I'll just read the whole verse again. Now it may be that the girl to whom I say, please let down your jar so that I may drink, and who answers, drink, and I will water your camels also. May she be the one whom you have appointed for your servant Isaac, and by this I will know that you have shown loving kindness to my master. A very specific prayer.